It was a cold, rainy night. The city streets were empty, except for the sound of water splashing under hurried footsteps. Under a flickering streetlight, a man sat alone on a bench, his hood pulled up, hands tucked into his sleeves. He looked like just another stranger lost in the chaos of the world. A few feet away, an old homeless man shuffled forward. His clothes were torn, his face lined with exhaustion. He had seen better days, long ago. But tonight, he had nothing left, except for a single, crumpled dollar bill. He glanced down at it. His last dollar. The only thing standing between him and another hungry night. He sighed, shaking his head. What difference did $1 make, anyway? As he looked up, his tired eyes fell on the hooded man. Something about him felt familiar. But in this city, faces blurred together. Rich or poor, everyone was just trying to survive. The homeless man hesitated. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he stepped forward and held out the dollar. Here. Take it, he said, his voice rough but kind. The hooded man looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, almost unreadable. He didn't reach for the money. Instead, he just stared at it, then at the man offering it. You need it more than me, the homeless man insisted. Still, no response. Just a small, almost invisible smile. And then, finally, the man spoke. Why? The homeless man chuckled. Because, no one should go to sleep hungry. A few feet away, someone laughed. A sharp, mocking laugh. Are you serious? A voice cut through the night. A beggar giving money to another beggar? That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. A man in a tailored suit stepped closer, shaking his head in amusement. His watch gleamed under the streetlight. Look at you two, he sneered. One's got nothing, the other's got even less. And here you are, sharing scraps. The homeless man said nothing. Neither did the hooded man. But something was about to change. And in the next few moments, the entire world would be watching. The rich man scoffed, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. His shoes, spotless despite the wet pavement, reflected the city lights. He took a step closer, shaking his head with an amused smirk. This is unbelievable, he chuckled. A man who has nothing, giving away the only thing he has left. And to who? Someone who clearly doesn't even want it. He glanced at the hooded man, waiting for some reaction. But there was none. Just quiet, steady eyes watching him, like a storm waiting to break. The homeless man clenched his fingers around the crumpled dollar. He had seen people like this before, men who measured worth in wealth, who believed kindness was just another form of weakness. Some things matter more than money, he muttered under his breath. The rich man laughed again, louder this time. Oh yeah? Like what? He spread his arms wide. Let me guess, love? Honor? Human decency? His tone dripped with sarcasm. Look around, old man. This city eats people like you alive. You think one nice gesture makes a difference? The homeless man met his gaze, steady and unshaken. It does, he said simply. The rich man rolled his eyes. Right. And what about you? He turned to the hooded man, his smirk widening. You gonna take his charity? Or are you just as delusional as he is? The hooded man remained silent. No movement. No reaction. Just a calm presence in the cold night air. A few people nearby had started to notice the exchange. A couple waiting for a cab, a man scrolling on his phone, a group of friends walking past, all slowing down, eyes flickering toward the unfolding scene. Sensing the growing attention, the rich man decided to take things further. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and flicked out a crisp $100 bill. Here's a real lesson in generosity, he said, waving it between his fingers. Since you're so eager to give, why don't we test your little philosophy? He turned to the homeless man, his grin sharp as a knife. You want to prove that kindness matters? Take this. The homeless man didn't move. The rich man stepped closer, practically shoving the bill in his face. Go on. Take it. Still, the old man didn't reach for it. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed at his sides. What's wrong? The rich man's smirk grew. Not good enough for you? Or do you just not like the idea of getting something you didn't earn? The homeless man looked him straight in the eye. His voice was calm, but firm. I'd rather give my last dollar to someone who needs it, than take 100 from someone who thinks he's better than me. For the first time, the rich man's expression faltered. A quiet murmur passed through the small crowd that had formed. A few exchanged glances, others whispered among themselves. The rich man scoffed, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes now. Frustration? Annoyance? Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head. He turned back to the hooded man, waving the 100 at him instead. And what about you? You gonna act like him too? Or are you actually smart enough to take free money when it's handed to you? The hooded man finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up, but not for the $100 bill. Instead, he took the crumpled dollar from the homeless man's hand, and held it up. The air shifted. The crowd leaned in, waiting. And for the first time that night, the hooded man spoke. This is worth more than that. The rich man blinked, caught off guard. His grip on the 100 tightened. A quiet tension filled the street. Something was about to happen. Something no one saw coming. The night felt heavier now. The streetlights buzzed faintly, the air thick with anticipation. The rich man's confident smirk was fading, replaced by something else, something he wasn't used to. Confusion. He stared at the hooded man, at the crumpled dollar bill now resting between his fingers. You're joking, right? His voice wasn't as sharp as before. The hooded man remained silent. His grip on the dollar was gentle but firm, like he was holding something valuable, something more than just paper. The crowd had grown larger now. People whispered among themselves, some recording the moment on their phones. A young woman in the front spoke up. What does he mean? How is that dollar worth more than 100? The rich man scoffed, turning toward her. Exactly. Finally, someone with common sense. He looked back at the hooded man, shaking his head. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but let's get real. This? He waved the $100 bill. This can buy food. A bed. A warm place to sleep. That? He pointed at the crumpled dollar. That's nothing. The homeless man shifted slightly, his tired eyes flickering between the two men. He had been quiet for a while now, just watching, waiting. Then, the hooded man finally spoke again. Tell me something, he said, his voice calm. How much money do you have? The question caught the rich man off guard. He laughed. What? You heard me. The hooded man's gaze was steady. How much? The rich man's smirk returned. More than you could ever imagine. The hooded man nodded slowly. And how much of it would you give, if no one was watching? Silence. The crowd was hooked now, hanging on to every word. The rich man shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. That's not the point. But it is. The hooded man held up the crumpled dollar again. This isn't about how much it's worth. It's about what it means. This man, he gestured toward the homeless man, gave away all he had left. Not for attention. Not to prove something. But because he thought someone else might need it more. The words lingered in the cold night air. The rich man crossed his arms. And? What does that prove? The homeless man finally spoke. His voice was rough but steady. It proves that money doesn't make a man rich. A few people in the crowd murmured in agreement. The rich man's jaw tightened. That's easy to say when you have nothing. The homeless man looked at him, eyes full of something deeper than anger, something like pity. And yet, here we are. The tension crackled like electricity. Then, a voice came from the crowd. Wait a second. A man holding his phone stepped forward, squinting at the hooded figure. No way, his eyes widened. Is that Keanu Reeves? Gasps rippled through the crowd. The rich man's smirk vanished. His eyes snapped to the hooded man, searching his face more closely now. The hooded man, Keanu Reeves, simply smiled. No denial. No grand reveal. Just quiet confirmation in the way he stood. The energy of the moment shifted. People whispered excitedly, some reaching for their phones to capture the moment. The rich man's face paled slightly. All this time, he had been talking down to Keanu Reeves. One of the most famous, most respected actors in the world. Known for his humility. His generosity. And now, he was standing here, on a rainy street corner, holding a homeless man's last dollar like it was the most valuable thing in the world. The rich man swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on him. He tried to regain control. So what? You're some big movie star. That doesn't change anything. He forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow now. You still look like a guy who just got handed $1 by a beggar. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he said, "No. I just got handed a lesson." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some people nodded in agreement. Others just stood there, taking in the weight of those words. The rich man shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no clever comeback this time. And for the first time all night, he had nothing to say. A heavy silence settled over the street. The rain had slowed to a quiet drizzle, but no one moved. No one spoke. The weight of Keanu's words still hung in the air. The rich man's confidence was cracking now. He glanced around, noticing the way the crowd had changed. They weren't looking at him the way they had before. No amusement. No curiosity. Just quiet judgment. He shifted his stance, trying to brush it off. "All right, fine," he scoffed, stuffing the $100 bill back into his wallet. "If you guys want to believe in fairy tales about generosity and kindness, be my guest. But in the real world, money is what matters. Not some stupid sentimental nonsense." A few people in the crowd frowned. Others shook their heads. Keanu studied him for a long moment, then let out a quiet chuckle. It wasn't mocking, just knowing. "You think money is power," he said simply. "That's why you can't understand why this dollar means more than that 100. The rich man crossed his arms. "Spare me the wisdom, all right? I've worked hard for what I have. Unlike some people." He shot a glance at the homeless man. Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at the old man beside him, then back at the rich man. His voice was steady, calm. "Tell me something. If you lost everything tomorrow, your money, your connections, your status, what would you have left?" The question hit harder than it should have. The rich man opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The crowd was locked in now, their expressions shifting. The power dynamic had flipped. It was no longer about money. It was about something deeper. Keanu let the silence linger before speaking again. "This man," he gestured to the homeless man, "lost everything a long time ago. But even now, with nothing, he still gave what little he had left. Not because he had to. Not because someone was watching. But because he knows what it means to go without, and still choose to be kind." The crowd murmured. People nodded, some visibly moved. The rich man swallowed, his grip tightening around his wallet. "That's just," he hesitated, then forced a smirk. "That's just emotions talking. In the end, money talks louder." Keanu's smile didn't fade. He held up the crumpled dollar one last time, turning it between his fingers. "No," he said softly. "Character does." A hush fell over the crowd. The rich man's smirk was gone now. Replaced by something else. Something dangerously close to doubt. And for the first time that night, he had no control over the moment. The street was silent now. The once confident rich man stood stiff, his hand still gripping his expensive wallet, but the weight of the moment had changed. His usual air of dominance was slipping away, and he could feel it. Keanu turned the crumpled dollar between his fingers, studying it as if it were something priceless. Then, without looking up, he spoke again. "You think money is what gives a man power. That's why you can't understand this." He glanced at the homeless man, then back at the rich man. But real power isn't in what you have. It's in who you are. The crowd was completely still, hanging on to every word. The rich man let out a forced laugh, trying to shake off the tension. "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "That's easy to say when you're a millionaire, Keanu." Keanu smiled slightly, his expression calm. "I've had money. I've lost money. And I've made it again. But it's never been what defines me." He took a step closer, his voice steady. "Do you know what people remember about you when you're gone? Not your bank account. Not your cars or your houses. They remember how you made them feel." The rich man stiffened. He was losing control of this moment, and he knew it. Keanu held up the dollar again. This man, he gestured to the homeless man, gave away everything he had left. Not because he wanted recognition. Not because he expected something in return. But because he understands something you don't. The rich man frowned. "And what's that?" Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "That wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you give." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others whispered among themselves. The energy in the air shifted, the moment sinking in. The rich man tried to laugh again, but it sounded forced now. "That's a nice speech," he said, stuffing his wallet back into his pocket. "But in the real world, kindness doesn't pay the bills." Keanu let a small pause settle before speaking again. "You're right. Kindness won't buy you a mansion. It won't fill your bank account. But tell me something," he tilted his head slightly. "What's the point of having everything, if no one respects you?" The words hit harder than the rich man expected. Keanu let the silence stretch. Then, without another word, he turned to the homeless man and gently placed the crumpled dollar back into his hand. "You were right," he said softly. "This was never mine to take." The homeless man looked down at the dollar, then back up at Keanu, his eyes glistening with something unspoken. Gratitude. Respect. Keanu turned back toward the crowd, his expression calm but resolute. "One day, all of us will leave this world. And when that day comes, no one will care how much we owned. They'll only care about what we left behind." He let those final words settle in the cold night air. The rich man stood frozen, his usual arrogance stripped away. He had no comeback. No clever retort. Because deep down, he knew Keanu was right. And with that, Keanu turned and walked away, leaving behind a moment the world would never forget. The moment spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the crowd had already posted clips of the encounter online. By the time Keanu walked away, hashtags had started trending. Hashtag Keanu Wisdom. Hashtag The Last Dollar. Hashtag What Truly Matters. People couldn't stop talking about it. The way Keanu had handled the situation with absolute calm. The way the rich man had crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance. And most of all, the powerful lesson hidden in a simple, crumpled dollar bill. Within hours, the video had millions of views. News outlets picked it up, dissecting every moment. Commentators called it one of the most profound public takedowns ever caught on camera. Celebrity reactions started pouring in. Dwayne Johnson tweeted, "Respect is the real currency. Keanu gets it." Ryan Reynolds joked. Plot twist, the rich guy just lost more than money, he lost the internet's respect. But it wasn't just celebrities. Everyday people were sharing their own stories, reflecting on the message Keanu had left behind. One user wrote, "I used to think success was about money. But this hit different." Another shared, "That homeless man gave away his last dollar. That's more generosity than some millionaires will show in a lifetime." Even financial experts chimed in, debating the deeper meaning behind the moment. Was wealth really about money? Or was it about impact? But perhaps the most unexpected reaction came from the rich man himself. A week later, he released a statement. No arrogance. No excuses. Just a simple admission. "I thought I knew what power was. That night, I realized I had no idea. I still have a lot to learn." The internet was stunned. Maybe, just maybe, something had changed. And all because one homeless man had given away his last dollar. Because one actor chose wisdom over ego. And because, sometimes, the smallest moments leave the biggest impact. The video may have ended, but the conversation is far from over. What just happened wasn't just a viral moment, it was a lesson. A reminder that wealth isn't just about money, but about what we leave behind. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in that moment, standing in that crowd, watching everything unfold, what would you have done? Would you have sided with the rich man, believing that money is everything? Or would you have understood the deeper message behind that crumpled dollar bill? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whose side were you on at the start? And did your opinion change by the end? And let's take this even further. Have you ever met someone who had nothing, but gave everything? Maybe a stranger who showed you kindness. Maybe a moment where you realized that money doesn't define true worth. Share your story below, because these are the conversations that matter. And if you want more powerful, real-life stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you the moments that make you think, that make you feel, that challenge the way we see the world. Because at the end of the day, the most valuable thing we have, is each other. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.